When we talk about the medieval Mongols, we often imagine them not just living in filth, but being happy to do so. However, the medieval Mongols did wash, bathe, and brush their teeth, just not in any way you'd recognize today. What they considered clean would probably make you gag. The truth is, their hygiene practices were shaped by survival on the harshest landscape on Earth, and what worked for them would absolutely horrify us today. So grab that popcorn, smash that like button, subscribe, and buckle up for some serious Mongol madness. Let's start with the elephant in the yurt, or should I say, the smell in the yurt. If you could time travel back to a 13th century Mongol camp, the first thing that would hit you wouldn't be an arrow. It'd be the stench. And I'm not talking about a little body odor here. We're talking about a wall of smell so thick you could almost see it. A potent mixture of unwashed bodies, rancid animal fat, horse sweat, fermented milk, and smoke from dung fires all mixing together in the dry steppe air. The Mongols had a complicated relationship with water. They believed it was sacred, a gift from the eternal blue sky, their supreme deity. Washing too much, especially in running water like rivers, could anger the spirits and bring bad luck. So bathing wasn't just uncommon, it was actually discouraged for most of the year. Think about that for a second. You're living in felt tents on the open steppe, riding horses all day, working with livestock, and you're actively avoiding baths because you think the gods might get mad at you. So how often did the Mongols actually bathe? Historical accounts from travelers like William of Rubruck and Marco Polo tell us that most Mongols bathed maybe 2 or 3 times a year, and that was only during the summer months when the weather was warm enough. In winter, when temperatures on the steppe could drop to -40 degrees, bathing was practically impossible. Rivers and lakes froze solid, and exposing your skin to wash would risk frostbite or death. But here's where it gets really interesting, and really gross. When Mongols did wash, they had a method that would make your skin crawl. Instead of using water and soap like we do, they would rub animal fat all over their bodies. Usually mutton grease or sheep fat, sometimes mixed with a bit of butter. They'd work this thick, smelly grease into their skin, covering every inch of their body. Then, using a dull knife, a piece of wood, or even the edge of a bone, they'd scrape the fat off. The theory was that the grease would bind to the dirt, sweat, and grime on their skin, and scraping it away would leave them clean. Now, did this actually work? Sort of. It would remove surface dirt and dead skin, but imagine the smell. Weak old mutton fat that's been sitting in the sun, mixed with your body heat and sweat, then scraped off and left in a pile outside your tent. The stench must have been incredible. And this wasn't a quick process either. It could take an hour or more to properly grease and scrape your entire body. Most people probably didn't bother doing it thoroughly, which meant they were walking around with patches of old grease, new grease, and accumulated filth all mixed together on their skin. And we haven't even gotten to their hair yet. Mongol hair care was a whole other level of disgusting. Both men and women wore their hair long, usually in elaborate braids. Mongol men famously shaved the tops of their heads, from the forehead to the crown, leaving a bald patch, and kept the rest of their hair long in the back and sides, braided or tied. This wasn't just fashion. It was practical. It kept their hair from getting in their eyes when they were shooting arrows from horseback, and the shaved portion helped their leather helmets fit better. But maintaining this hairstyle meant regular shaving, and that was a brutal process. Mongol men used bronze or iron razors, basically just curved, sharp blades, to shave their heads dry. No water, no shaving cream, no mirror. Just a sharp piece of metal scraped across your scalp, while your friend or family member tried not to slice your head open. Cuts were common, and infections were a real risk. Some men would rub a bit of animal fat on their scalp first to help the blade glide, but that often made the process even more painful because the fat would get into the cuts and burns. Now what about keeping their hair clean? Here's the thing, they didn't. Mongol men and women would coat their braids in animal fat, usually mutton grease or butter, to protect their hair from the brutal steppe weather. The wind on the open plains was constant and could dry out hair until it became brittle and broke off. The fat acted like a protective coating, keeping moisture in and wine damage out. But this wasn't a light application. We're talking about thick globs of grease worked deep into every strand of hair and then braided tight so it would stay in place for weeks or even months at a time. The result? Hair that was stiff, greasy, and absolutely reeking of old animal fat. Over time, the grease would accumulate dust, dirt, bits of dried grass, and probably some unfortunate insects. By the end of a few months, a Mongol warrior's braids would be so stiff with accumulated grease and grime that they could probably stand up on their own. When they finally did wash their hair, and again, this was rare, maybe twice a year, they'd use water mixed with something acidic to cut through all that fat. Sometimes fermented mare's milk, sometimes human or animal urine. Yes, you heard that right. Urine. The ammonia in stale urine was actually pretty effective at breaking down grease, so they'd pour it over their hair, work it through, and then rinse with cold water. Let's talk about their breath for a second, because this is something that often gets overlooked. The Mongol diet was almost entirely meat and dairy. They ate boiled mutton, dried beef, horse meat, and drank fermented mare's milk called kumis. No vegetables, no fruit, just animal products, day in and day out. This diet kept them strong and provided the calories they needed for their harsh lifestyle, but it absolutely destroyed their breath. Kumis, in particular, was a staple. This fermented drink was slightly alcoholic, sour, and smelled like a combination of buttermilk and vinegar. Everyone drank it constantly, men, women, children. It was their main source of hydration during the summer months when water was scarce, but it left their breath smelling sour and pungent. Add to that the fact that they were eating chunks of boiled mutton with their hands, often without fully cleaning their teeth afterward. And you've got a recipe for some truly legendary bad breath. Did they brush their teeth? Sort of. They'd use small sticks, twigs, or pieces of animal bone to pick food out from between their teeth. Sometimes they'd chew on aromatic herbs or roots to freshen their breath, but this was more about masking the smell than actually cleaning their mouths. Dental hygiene, as we understand it, didn't exist. Cavities and tooth decay were common, and many Mongols lost teeth as they got older, which only made eating their tough, chewy diet even harder. Now let's get into something that was absolutely universal among the Mongols: lice. Everyone had them. Rich, poor, warrior, noble. It didn't matter. Lice were just a fact of life on the steppe. They lived in people's hair, in their clothes, in the felt walls of their jurs, in their bedding. Everywhere. And because the Mongols rarely washed and wore the same clothes for months at a time, lice had the perfect environment to thrive. So how did they deal with this constant infestation? Delousing was a regular social activity, almost like grooming in a family of monkeys. Family members would sit together in the evening, usually around the fire, and pick lice out of each other's hair. They'd crack them between their fingernails with a satisfying pop. Yeah. That's a detail that really drives home how normalized this was. And then toss them into the fire. This wasn't seen as disgusting or shameful. It was just part of daily life, and it was actually a bonding activity. Parents would delouse their children, spouses would delouse each other, and friends would help each other out. But picking lice by hand could only do so much. The Mongols also tried using various folk remedies to keep the lice population under control. One common method was rubbing their scalps with rancid butter mixed with crushed herbs that were supposed to repel the insects. Did it work? Not really. The lice adapted, and the rancid butter just added another layer of smell to an already fragrant situation. Some wealthier Mongols had access to fine-toothed combs made of wood, bone, or bronze that they could use to comb lice and nits out of their hair. These combs were actually one of the few grooming tools the Mongols consistently used, and they were valuable enough to be passed down through families or even buried with people when they died. All right, let's move on to waste management. Because this is where medieval life gets really medieval. The Mongols were nomadic people, constantly moving across the steppe with their herds. This meant they didn't have permanent structures, no sewers, no plumbing, no outhouses. When nature called, you just walked a short distance away from camp and did your business in the open. Privacy wasn't really a concept on the flat, treeless steppe. You'd squat down, do what you needed to do, and that was it. No toilet paper. Obviously. That was a Chinese invention that hadn't made its way to the Mongols yet. So what did they use to clean themselves? Whatever was available. Grass, leaves, smooth stones, or sometimes just their left hand and some dirt or snow. This is why the left hand was considered unclean in many Central Asian cultures, and why you'd never eat or greet someone with your left hand. Because the Mongols were always on the move, waste disposal wasn't really a problem like it was in settled cities. They'd set up camp, stay for a few weeks or months while their animals grazed, and then pack up and move on. Nature would take care of the rest. But what about during the brutal steppe winters, when going outside to relieve yourself could literally be life-threatening? They used chamber pots. These were usually made of leather, wood, or occasionally metal, and they'd be kept inside the GER for nighttime use or during storms. In the morning, someone, usually women or children, would empty them outside, though not always very far from camp. Sanitation wasn't a priority, and the smell around a long-term Mongol camp must have been pretty intense, especially in the summer. Now let's talk about soap, or the lack of it. The Mongols did have a form of soap, but it wasn't like anything we'd recognize today. They made it by mixing animal fat with wood ash, which created a chemical reaction that produced lye. This was the same basic process used all over the medieval world, but the Mongol version was particularly harsh because they didn't have access to the refined oils and pleasant-smelling additives that wealthier cultures used. This lye soap was incredibly caustic. It could burn your skin if you used it too aggressively, and it smelled terrible, like burnt fat and bitter chemicals. Because of this, it was mainly used for washing clothes, cleaning leather goods, or scrubbing particularly stubborn stains out of felt. People almost never used it on their bodies because it was just too harsh and could cause painful chemical burns if you weren't careful. When Mongols did wash their hands or face, which again wasn't often, they'd usually just use cold water, or in winter, they'd rub snow directly on their skin. It was quick, brutal, and probably didn't do much good, but it was better than nothing. Now let's talk about Mongol women, because they faced unique challenges when it came to hygiene. Mongol women wore their hair in elaborate braids, sometimes dozens of them, that could reach all the way down to their waist or even past it. These braids were a source of pride and were often decorated with silver ornaments, beads, and ribbons. But like the men, women rarely washed their hair. They'd coat their braids in animal fat, mutton grease, butter, or sometimes horse fat, to keep them protected from the harsh steppe environment. The braids would be tied tightly and left in place for weeks or months without being undone. When it was finally time to wash them, the process was long and difficult. They'd heat water in large bronze or iron pots, then add fermented mare's milk, or yes, urine, to help cut through all the accumulated grease. They'd work this mixture through their hair, section by section, then rinse it with cold water from the river or lake. After washing, they'd rebraid their hair while it was still damp and coat it with fresh fat to protect it all over again. The whole process could take an entire day, which is one reason why it happened so rarely. And then there's menstruation, which was its own special challenge. Mongol women didn't have access to anything like modern sanitary products, so they had to improvise. Poorer women used wool or felt, the same materials their jers were made from, which they'd fold into pads and secure with strips of cloth or leather. These would be washed and reused over and over again. Washing meant rinsing them in cold river water, or once again, soaking them in urine because the ammonia helped break down bloodstains. Wealthier Mongol women might have strips of cotton or linen cloth that they could use, but these were expensive and rare on the steppe, where everything had to be either made from animal products or traded from distant lands. During their periods, women were still expected to do all their regular work: cooking, milking animals, making felt, riding horses. There was no concept of taking it easy or resting during menstruation. There were some fascinating cultural beliefs around menstruation too, Some Mongols believed that menstrual blood had spiritual power. It could ward off evil spirits, which is why some women would bury their used cloths in special places around the camp. But there was also a belief that menstrual blood could bring bad luck to livestock or spoil fermented kumis, so menstruating women were sometimes kept away from the horses or the kumis' bags during their cycles. There were some truly wild myths about menstruation in medieval times across many cultures, and the Mongols had their share. Some believed that if a menstruating woman rode a mare, the mare would become infertile. Others thought that menstrual blood could curdle milk or cause weapons to rust faster. These beliefs weren't about shaming women. They were more about trying to understand and control forces that seemed mysterious and powerful. Finally, let's talk about laundry. Because yes, the Mongols did wash their clothes, just not very often. Remember, water was sacred, so using it to clean clothing was seen as somewhat wasteful and potentially spiritually dangerous. Most Mongols wore the same deal, their traditional long robe, for months at a time without washing it. They'd just brush off visible dirt, air it out occasionally, and keep wearing it until it literally fell apart. When they did wash clothes, maybe once or twice a year, it was a major undertaking. They'd take their clothing down to a river or lake and beat it with sticks or stones to loosen the dirt. Then they'd soak it in water mixed with urine. I know, I keep coming back to urine, but it was genuinely one of their most useful cleaning agents, and then rinse everything in the river. The clothes would be laid out on rocks or grass to dry in the sun and wind. For Mongol women, doing laundry was genuinely dangerous. Rivers could be fast-flowing and treacherous, especially in spring when they were swollen with snowmelt. Women could slip on wet rocks, get swept away by currents, or, in winter, fall through thin ice. There are historical records of people drowning while trying to wash clothes in rivers, and this wasn't unique to the Mongols. It was a problem across medieval societies. The Mongols did have one advantage over settled medieval peoples, though. Because they moved constantly, they weren't living in the same filth day after day like people in crowded medieval cities were. A Mongol camp might smell pretty bad, but it wasn't building up layers of human and animal waste over years and decades like London or Paris were. When things got too dirty, they just moved to fresh grazing land. So there you have it, the full, unfiltered, deeply smelly truth about Mongol hygiene. They weren't dirty because they didn't care or because they were somehow less civilized. They were adapting to one of the most challenging environments on Earth with the resources they had available. Water was scarce and sacred. Bathing in winter could kill you. Animal fat, urine, and simple scraping were the best tools they had for staying as clean as possible. But let's be real, you absolutely would not want to be downwind of a Mongol camp on a hot summer day. The combination of unwashed bodies coated in rancid animal fat, greasy hair, fermented milk breath, livestock, dung fires, and months of accumulated camp waste would have created a smell that would knock you off your horse. If you made it all the way through this video without gagging, you're tougher than most. Hit that like button, subscribe for more Mongol madness, and drop a comment telling me which hygiene practice shocked you the most: the urine hair wash, the fat scraping, or the communal delousing sessions. And if you think this was gross, just wait until you see what's coming next. We're diving even deeper into the weird, wild, and absolutely disgusting world of the Mongol Empire. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. See you in the next one.